My name is Patricia Gomez. I'm 42 years old, and I've been a ranger at Big Bend National Park in Texas for 15 years. I work one of the most remote stations in the entire park system, over 30 miles from the nearest town, often the only ranger within a 50-mile radius. The isolation has never bothered me. If anything, I prefer it to the crowded parks where you spend more time managing tourists than protecting wilderness. But last August, something started knocking on my cabin door at exactly midnight. And after 7 nights of it, I learned that some visitors don't need bodies to make their presence known. The first knock came on August 12th. Single rap on the door, solid and deliberate, like knuckles on wood. I was reading in my chair, about to turn in for the night. I looked at my clock. Exactly midnight. I figured it was a camper with an emergency, though we'd had no one check into the backcountry sites that day. I opened the door to empty desert. No vehicle, no flashlight beam, no sign of anyone. The motion sensor light hadn't triggered. I called out a few times, checked around the cabin with my flashlight, saw nothing but creosote bushes and the vast darkness of the Chihuahuan Desert. I figured maybe it was a bird hitting the door or wood contracting in the cooling temperature. Went back to bed. The second knock came at midnight the following night. Same single rap, same deliberate sound. This time I was ready. I had my flashlight in hand, opened the door within seconds. Nothing. I searched wider, checking behind every bush, scanning for animal tracks in the sandy soil. The dirt showed no footprints, no disturbance, just empty desert and stars so bright they cast shadows. Third night, midnight exactly. Knock. Fourth night. Knock. By the fifth night, I was setting up my trail camera pointed at the door. Motion sensors at every approach angle, even spread some flour on the ground to catch footprints. At 11:55 p.m., I stood inside with my hand on the doorknob, ready. Midnight came. The knock sounded. I yanked the door open instantly. Nothing visible. But the flour showed something impossible. A single handprint, adult-sized, pressed into the powder directly in front of the door. But there were no footprints leading to or from it, just the handprint, appearing in the instant between the knock and my opening the door. I stood there staring at it, my heart hammering, until I noticed something else. The handprint was cold. Not temperature cold, but producing cold. I could see my breath condensing above it, frost forming at the edges of the print despite the 85-degree night temperature. I took photographs, measurements, collected a sample of the flour. Then I sat inside and waited for night 6, because by then I knew it would come back. Whatever it was had established a pattern, a ritual, and I had the sense it would continue until something changed. Night 6 came. At 11:50 p.m. I did something different. I wrote a note and taped it to the outside of the door. I acknowledge your presence. What do you want? Then I sat inside, waiting. Midnight. The knock came. But this time, after the single rap, there was scratching. Something drawn or writing on my door. I waited 60 seconds, counting them off, then opened the door. The note was gone. In its place, scratched into the paint of my door in handwriting that looked ancient and careful. To be remembered. Below that, a date, October 17th, 1943. I spent the next day researching. October 17th, 1943 was significant in Big Bend history. It was the day a young ranger named Thomas Whitfield died while patrolling the remote desert section where my cabin now stands. He'd been caught in a flash flood, swept away, his body recovered 3 days later, miles downstream. He was 23 years old, recently married, had been with the Park Service for only 6 months. The old reports described him as dedicated, eager, often patrolling far beyond his assigned areas because he loved the solitude of the desert. His cabin had stood approximately where mine stands now. Different structure, but same location, same view of the Chisos Mountains, same isolation. That night, night 7, I was ready with my own message. At 11:45 p.m., I pinned the photograph to my door. I'd found it in the park archives. Thomas Whitfield in his ranger uniform, young and smiling, standing in front of his cabin. Below the photo I wrote, Thomas Whitfield, Ranger, died October 17, 1943. You are remembered. Midnight came. The knock sounded, but softer this time, gentler. I opened the door immediately. The photo was still there, but something had touched it. There was a handprint in the dust on the glass, the same size as the print in the flower, and below my message, new words scratched carefully into the wood. Thank you. I can rest now. The knocking never came again, but sometimes on clear desert nights, when I'm outside looking at the stars, I feel a presence nearby. Not threatening, just accompanying, like I'm not quite as alone as I think I am, like somewhere in the layers of time that saturate this ancient desert, a young ranger is still on patrol, still protecting the wilderness he loved, still making his rounds. I never filed an official report. What would I say? That a ghost knocked on my door for a week until I acknowledged his existence? But I keep the photograph on my desk now, and once a year, on October 17th, I pour a second cup of coffee and set it outside on the porch rail, just in case some part of Thomas Whitfield is still out there, still watching over Big Bend, still deserving of the recognition he never got enough of in life. My name is Kevin Park. I'm 51 years old, and I've been a wilderness ranger in Olympic National Park in Washington State for 22 years. I specialize in the park's temperate rainforest sections, the wettest, densest, most primordial parts of the park where moss covers everything, and the canopy is so thick that even at noon it feels like twilight. It's beautiful and alien and slightly oppressive, and I've always loved it. But 6 months ago, I found something in the whole rainforest that doesn't belong in any forest, temperate or otherwise, and I'm still trying to understand what it means. It was late February, the dead middle of our wet season, when the park gets maybe 20 visitors a week. I was doing a solo patrol of the backcountry trails, checking for winter storm damage, clearing deadfall, making sure the primitive campsites were still accessible, standard maintenance work. I was about 8 miles in a section of old-growth forest where the Sitka spruces are over 200 feet tall and 500 years old, when I saw something that shouldn't exist. There was a door, just standing there in the middle of the forest, 10 feet off the trail, not attached to anything. No building, no frame, no structure, just a wooden door, maybe 7 feet tall, ordinary in every way, except that it stood vertically in the middle of the forest, with nothing around it. I approached slowly, my brain trying to rationalize it. Someone's art project? Discarded building materials? But the door wasn't discarded. It was standing purposefully, held upright by a base I couldn't see, perfectly vertical, perfectly placed. It was old but well maintained, the wood weathered but solid, with a brass doorknob that showed the patina of age. I walked around it. From the back, it was just a door, You could see through the crack where the frame would be, see the forest on the other side. Nothing unusual. But from the front, looking at it straight on, there was something off about the view through that crack. The forest visible through the gap didn't quite match the forest around it. Different angle of light, different density of undergrowth. I reached for the doorknob, then hesitated. Every instinct I'd developed in 22 years of wilderness work was screaming at me not to open it. But I'm a ranger. My job is to investigate unusual things in the park, to understand what belongs and what doesn't. So I gripped the brass knob. It was cold, far colder than the ambient temperature, and I turned it. The door opened. On the other side was forest, but not the forest I was standing in. The trees were similar, Sitka spruce, western hemlock, the same species, but arranged differently, more dense, older, and the light was wrong. It was the same overcast February afternoon I'd been hiking through, but the light coming through that doorway had a quality to it, a green-gold tinge that made everything look slightly unreal. I stood there with the door open, looking into that other forest, and I could smell it, petrichor and cedar and something else, something old and organic and faintly sweet, like flowers that had been extinct for millennia. A breeze came through the doorway, warmer than it should be, carrying sounds. Birds I didn't recognize, the rustle of something large moving through undergrowth, and far away maybe, the sound of water. I should have closed the door, should have marked the location and reported it and let someone else investigate. But I'm not someone else. I'm a wilderness ranger with 22 years of experience and a need to understand what I'm looking at. So I stepped through. The transition was instant and absolute. One step, and I was in the other forest. The door stood behind me, still open, showing the Olympic National Forest I'd come from. But I was somewhere else now, somewhere that followed similar rules, but wasn't quite the same place. The temperature was warmer, maybe 65 degrees instead of the 45 I'd left. The air was denser, more humid, more alive, and the forest was bigger. Not just the trees, everything. The ferns were 6 feet tall. The mushrooms growing on fallen logs were the size of dinner plates. The banana slugs crossing the trail were 8 inches long, and when I looked up at the canopy, I saw something moving up there that might have been a bird, but was too large, its wingspan too broad. I walked for maybe 10 minutes, staying close to the door, not wanting to lose sight of my exit, the trail I was on, and there was a trail worn into the ground by a passage, but narrower than the Olympic trails, less maintained, curved through the massive trees and opened into a clearing. In the clearing stood a ranger station, same architectural style as the Olympic stations from the 1930s, built by the Civilian Conservation Corps, but larger and somehow newer looking, despite clearly being old. Smoke was coming from the chimney. There was a truck parked outside, a model I didn't recognize, somewhere between a 1940s pickup and something more modern. And on the porch, sitting in a chair, was a ranger, a woman, maybe 60, in a uniform that looked almost right, but had subtle differences, different patches, different insignia. She was drinking coffee and writing in a notebook, and she looked up when I approached. "You came through the whole door," she said. Not a question. Her voice was calm, unsurprised. "The what?" "The door. In the whole rainforest. About 8 miles in from the visitor center, standing in the middle of the forest." She closed her notebook. "Happens every few years. Someone finds one of the doors and can't resist opening it. Usually they panic and run back through immediately. You're the first in maybe 5 years who's walked this far. Where am I? Same place you were. Olympic National Park, just not your Olympic National Park. She gestured at the forest around us. There are layers, Ranger. Versions. Possibilities. This is one where the glaciers never advanced as far, where the ice age was gentler, where the forest has been growing uninterrupted for 20,000 years instead of 12. Same location, different history. That's not possible. And yet, here you are. She poured a second cup of coffee from her thermos. I'm Ranger Davis. Been stationed here for 30 years, though time works a little differently between layers. You going to tell me your name, or do I call you trespasser in my log? Park. Kevin Park. I'm a ranger in Olympic National, the Olympic I came from. Good to meet you, Park. You should probably head back soon. The doors don't stay stable for long. Maybe another hour, maybe less. If it closes while you're here, you'll be stuck until another one opens, and that could be years. I should have run back immediately, but I had questions, dozens of them. How many of these layers are there? Don't know. I've only seen 3, and I've been doing this for 3 decades. There's your version, this version, and one other that's older and stranger. Forests so ancient the trees are sequoia-sized, with things living in them that I don't have names for. She took a sip of coffee. The park is thin here, thin between versions, thin between what is and what could have been. The doors appear where the boundary is thinnest, where the different histories are closest together. Smart people leave them alone. But you went through. 30 years ago, I was a young ranger in your version of Olympic. Found a door, opened it, ended up here. By the time I found my way back to the door, it had closed. I've been here ever since. She didn't sound upset about it. It's not a bad life. The work is the same, the forest is healthier, and I'm the only human for possibly thousands of miles, which suits me fine. Don't you want to go back? Back to what? My family is 30 years older or dead by now. My friends moved on. The park I knew has changed. This is home now. She stood, gathering her things. But you should go back. You've got a life there, people who will miss you, and you've only been here 20 minutes. The adjustment gets harder the longer you stay. Your body starts resonating with this version's frequency, and going back becomes more difficult. I followed her advice. I thanked her, headed back to the door, and stepped through to my own version of Olympic National Park. The door stood open for another 30 seconds, long enough for me to see Ranger Davis walking back toward her station. Then it closed with a soft click and began to fade. Within 5 minutes, it had vanished entirely, leaving no trace it had ever existed except the memory and the smell of that other forest still clinging to my clothes. I've been back to that spot a dozen times. The door has never reappeared, but sometimes, when I'm deep in the whole rainforest on overcast days, I catch a scent on the wind that doesn't belong. Flowers from a different timeline, growth from a forest that has never known ice. And I wonder how many other doors exist in Olympic. How many other rangers have stepped through and never come back? How many versions of this forest exist simultaneously in layers we can't normally perceive? I keep my eyes open now, looking for doors, looking for thin places. Because if Ranger Davis is right, if there are multiple layers of Olympic National Park existing in the same space but different histories, then every forest might be the same way. Every wilderness might have doors to other versions of itself, other timelines where different choices led to different outcomes. I haven't told anyone officially, but I write about it in my personal journal, and I mark coordinates of places where the forest feels particularly thin, where I sometimes catch glimpses of things that don't quite belong, just in case. Just so that if another door appears, if another ranger finds themselves stepping between layers, they'll know they're not the first. The wilderness is deeper than we think, and some parts of it exist in more directions than the ones we can see. My name is Deshaun Carter. I'm 35 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I was a law enforcement ranger at Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. I resigned last Tuesday, moved to Denver, and took a job with REI because I can't go underground anymore. Not after what I found in the unmapped sections of the cave system. Not after I understood what lives in the absolute darkness beyond where our tours penetrate. And definitely not after it learned my name. Mammoth Cave is the longest known cave system in the world. Over 400 miles of explored passages, with potentially hundreds more miles undiscovered. I've been working there for 8 years, primarily in law enforcement, but also doing some cave rescue and restoration work. I was comfortable underground, comfortable in the dark, comfortable with the cold silence, and the sense of being inside the earth, until I wasn't. It started in late September, when we had reports of unauthorized cavers going off trail in the Gothic Avenue section. Idiots trying to explore unmapped areas without permits or proper equipment. My job was to find them, cite them, and escort them back to authorized areas. I went in with my partner, Ranger Melissa Torres, both of us with full caving gear, radios, multiple light sources. We found the entry point they'd used, a squeeze between formations that led to a passage not on the tour routes. We followed their footprints in the cave mud, their chalk marks on the walls, going deeper into sections I'd never been in despite 8 years at the park. After about 45 minutes, we found their abandoned gear, helmets, rope, a pack with water and food. But no cavers, no bodies, no sign of what had happened to them. Radio for backup, Melissa said, her voice tight. She was senior ranger, had been caving for 15 years, and I'd never heard her sound scared before. We tried. No signal. Too deep. Too much rock between us and the surface. We were about to turn back when we heard it. Singing. Faint. Distant. Echoing through the passages in a way that made it impossible to tell direction. A woman's voice, singing something that might have been a lullaby or might have been something older. "Hello," I called out. "This is Park Ranger Carter. If you can hear me, respond. We're here to help." The singing stopped. Then, after a long pause, my own voice came back to me. "Hello? This is Park Ranger Carter. If you can hear me, respond. We're here to help." Perfect mimicry. My exact intonation, cadence, the slight Tennessee accent I've never quite lost, but it came from deeper in the cave, from passages that led down into unmapped territory. Melissa grabbed my arm. "We're leaving, now." But before we could move, the singing started again, except now it was my voice singing, wordless and wrong, echoing from multiple directions at once, like there were several of me down in the dark, harmonizing with myself. We ran, stumbled back through the squeeze, through Gothic Avenue, into the main corridors where tour groups walk, We didn't stop until we were in the historic entrance in daylight, with fresh air and the sounds of tourists asking normal questions about stalactites and underground rivers. We filed a report. Search teams went in to look for the missing cavers. They found the abandoned gear, but nothing else. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle, just equipment left behind like the people had simply evaporated. And they found something else. Footprints in the cave mud leading deeper into unexplored passages. Human footprints, barefoot, adult-sized, hundreds of them, going in all directions, covering walls and ceiling as if whoever or whatever made them could walk on any surface regardless of gravity. The search was called off after a week. The missing cavers were presumed dead, victims of a cave-in or drowning or any number of underground hazards. The passages they'd entered were officially closed. I should have left it alone. But 2 nights later, I woke up in my apartment to the sound of singing. That same voice, the same melody I'd heard underground, coming from my closet. I turned on every light in the apartment, checked every room, found nothing. But the singing continued, muffled now, like it was coming from under the floor or through the walls. And then I heard my own voice join in, harmonizing, except I wasn't singing. I was standing in my living room, mouth closed, while somewhere my voice was singing underground song. It happened again the next night and the next. Always around 3 a.m., always the singing starting first. Then my voice joining in from somewhere I wasn't. I started sleeping with lights on, started recording the sounds. The recordings captured only silence, but I could hear it clearly. I went back to the cave. Stupid, I know, but I needed to understand. I went alone during off hours without telling anyone. I went back to Gothic Avenue, back to that squeeze, back into the unmapped passages. The abandoned gear was gone. In its place was a pile of ranger uniforms, dozens of them, different sizes, different eras, based on the style. Some looked decades old. The fabric rotted and stained with cave mud. Others were newer, including one that looked exactly like mine, complete with my name tag, except I was wearing my uniform. This was a duplicate. And on the cave wall, written in mud using fingers, or something like fingers, "We know your name, Deshaun Carter. We sing your songs now. Come deeper. Come down where the earth remembers everything." I ran again, got out of the cave, went straight to the superintendent's office, resigned effective immediately. Told them I had a family emergency, had to leave Kentucky, had to get away from the caves. They asked questions. I didn't answer. I just packed my apartment, drove to Denver, and got as far from Mammoth Cave as I could while staying in the mountains where caves are rare and shallow. But the singing followed me. Every few nights, around 3 a.m., I hear it. Faint now, distant, like it's echoing from Kentucky to Colorado through underground passages that don't officially exist. And my own voice is always there, harmonizing, singing songs I don't know the words to, pulled from my throat by something that lives in the absolute darkness beneath the earth. I've done research, found stories from the 1800s, from when Mammoth Cave was first being explored commercially. Disappearances, cavers who went in and never came out. And always the stories mentioned singing, voices in the dark, the sense of being followed by something that could move through solid rock and had learned to mimic human speech. The native peoples, the Cherokee and Shawnee who lived in Kentucky before European contact, had stories about the caves. They called them mouths of the earth, and said that things lived in the deepest parts, things that had been there since before humans, things that collected sounds and voices and memories in the darkness, where nothing else could survive. They said you should never tell the caves your name, because once they knew you, they would never forget you, would never stop singing you back down. I told the caves my name. I shouted it into the darkness when I was trying to find those missing cavers, and something down there heard me, learned me, added my voice to its collection. I don't sleep well anymore. I work at REI during the day, selling camping equipment and climbing gear to people who don't know that some wildernesses are better left unexplored. At night, I keep every light on and try not to listen for the singing. But it's always there, faint at the edge of hearing. My own voice singing in harmony with dozens or hundreds of other voices. All of us trapped in the memory of something that lives in the deepest darkness. Something that will sing us forever in caves we'll never escape, even though we're no longer physically there. If you ever go to Mammoth Cave, stay on the tour routes. Don't squeeze through cracks into unmapped passages. Don't call out your name in the darkness. And if you hear singing, if you hear your own voice coming back to you from the deep places, run. Get to the light. Get away from the caves. Because once the earth learns your name, it never forgets. And it will sing you back down into the darkness eventually, whether you go willingly or not. I can hear it now, even as I write this. My voice harmonizing with the ancient song of things that live where light has never reached. Singing me back to Kentucky, singing me down into the earth. I don't think I can resist much longer. My name is Maria Santos. I'm 28 years old and I'm a wildlife biologist temporarily assigned to Everglades National Park in Florida. I came here 6 months ago to study invasive Burmese pythons and their impact on native species populations. It was supposed to be straightforward research. Track the snakes, document their prey, help develop management strategies. But in May, I found something in the deepest part of the swamp that isn't a python, isn't native, and definitely isn't on any species list maintained by science. And it's been following me ever since. The Everglades is vast, 1.5 million acres of wetland, sawgrass prairie, and mangrove swamps. Most of it is inaccessible except by boat or airboat, and some of it is so remote that even long-time rangers have never visited certain areas. That's where I do most of my research. In the deep backcountry where the pythons thrive away from human observation. On May 14th, I was in a section of the park about 20 miles from the nearest access point, deep in a cypress swamp that floods for most of the year. I was tracking a radio-collared python that had been moving in unusual patterns, heading into areas where we typically don't find them. I was in my canoe following the signal when I came to a place where the canopy was so thick it blocked out the sun despite being noon. The water here was darker than usual, stained almost black by tannins, and it was completely still. No current, no ripples, just mirror-smooth surface reflecting the twisted cypress trees. The radio signal was strong, indicating the python was close, but I couldn't see it. Then I noticed the trees. They were dead, every single one in a circular area maybe 100 feet across. Not all dead, like they'd been standing dead for years. Fresh dead, like they died recently, but all at once. The bark was intact, but the leaves were gone, the branches bare, and there was no sign of disease or fire or any normal cause of death. The radio signal was coming from the center of the circle. I paddled slowly toward it, my skin prickling with the sense that something was very wrong. In the middle of the circle, floating on the surface, was my python. Dead. Its 14-foot body was bloated and discolored, clearly deceased for several days based on the decomposition. But that was impossible. I'd been tracking this snake for 3 months. The collar transmitted every 6 hours. The last signal had been 8 hours ago, coming from 10 miles away, and the snake had been moving normally, alive, active, hunting. I approached carefully, used a pole to pull the carcass closer. The python was definitely dead, and it was definitely my python. The collar was intact, still transmitting. But something had killed it recently, and in this location, despite the fact that 8 hours ago it had been alive and miles away. I took samples, photographs, documented everything. Then I noticed something else. In the water, just below the surface, there were more bodies, alligators, dozens of them, all sizes, from juveniles to full-grown adults, all dead, all floating in a perfect circle around the central point where the python was. And at the very center, barely visible below the dark water, there was something else, something large, something pale, something that didn't match any anatomy I recognized. It looked almost like a tree trunk, but it was moving slightly, pulsing, and it had what might have been eyes, dozens of them, covering the surface, all closed. I should have left immediately, but I'm a scientist, and I couldn't identify what I was looking at. So I did something incredibly stupid. I reached into the water with my sampling pole to touch it. The moment the pole made contact, every eye opened. They weren't eyes in any conventional sense. They were more like wounds in the pale flesh that could somehow see. And they all focused on me simultaneously, tracking my movement with an intelligence that was absolutely not animal and absolutely not human. The thing moved, rose from the water slowly, impossibly large, pale and segmented like a worm, but wrong, covered in those eyes, dripping with dead vegetation and decomposing fish. It didn't make a sound, but I felt its attention on me like a physical weight, like it was examining me, cataloging me, deciding something about me. I paddled harder than I've ever paddled anything, got out of that circle of dead trees, got away from the thing that should not exist. I made it back to my truck, drove to the ranger station, and sat in the parking lot for an hour trying to decide what to report. What could I say? That I'd found a giant worm thing covered in eyes that killed everything in a 100-foot radius? That I'd violated about 6 safety protocols by going into that area alone? That I'd encountered something that couldn't exist according to every biological principle I'd ever learned? I filed a minimal report. Python found dead, unusual die-off in the area, possible toxin in the water, needed follow-up investigation. I didn't mention the thing I'd seen, didn't mention the eyes. But it followed me back. That night, I woke up in my apartment to find every eye in the place watching me. Not real eyes, reflections, in mirrors, in windows, in the screen of my turned-off TV, in puddles of water, in anything remotely reflective. The same eyes I'd seen on that thing in the swamp, dozens of them, all focused on me, all tracking my movement when I walked across the room. It happened again the next night, and the next. Every reflective surface in my life became a window through which something was watching me. I covered mirrors, avoided windows at night, stopped looking at my phone screen unless absolutely necessary. I tried to continue my research, but every time I went into the field, I'd find those eyes in puddles, in the shine on a leaf, in the visor of my truck. Always watching, always tracking, always present. Last week, I found something worse. I was reviewing my field camera footage, cameras I'd set up to photograph pythons automatically. In every single image, in the background, barely visible, there were eyes floating in the water, hidden in the vegetation, looking out from shadows. The thing from the swamp had been following me, observing every location I visited, tracking my movements through the park. And in the most recent footage from yesterday, I can see something else. In the very corner of the frame, barely visible, there's a shape, pale, segmented, massive, moving through the water toward the camera, toward me, because I was standing near the camera when that image was captured. I'm leaving Florida tomorrow, ending my research contract early, moving back to California, getting away from the Everglades. I've already packed. I'm writing this in my empty apartment, surrounded by boxes, trying not to look at any reflective surfaces. But I can feel it watching me even now, in the windows, in the dark screen of my laptop, in my own eyes when I catch my reflection accidentally for just a moment. Before I look away, I see something else behind my pupils, something ancient and patient and covered in eyes that never close. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it's a species unknown to science, or something that predates species classifications entirely, or something that exists in the deep swamps, because the deep swamps are thin places where reality isn't quite stable. But I know it's real, and I know it's aware, and I know it has decided to observe me the way I've spent years observing wildlife. The hunter has become the studied. The observer has become the observed. And I don't think changing states will help, because the thing I disturbed in the Everglades doesn't seem limited by geography or distance. It exists wherever there's water, wherever there's a reflective surface, wherever something can watch from the other side. So, I'm writing this as both warning and documentation. If you're doing research in the Everglades, if you're exploring the deep backcountry where the cypress grows thick and the water runs black, watch for circles of dead trees. Watch for places where everything has died at once. And if you see something pale moving below the surface, something covered in eyes, don't touch it. Don't let it know you've seen it. Because once it sees you back, it never stops watching. I can feel it now, even here in my landlocked apartment in California, in every mirror, every window, every surface that can reflect. Always watching, always there, studying me with the same clinical interest I once had for snakes, alligators, except I'm the specimen now, and I don't think this observation will ever end. My name is Richard Tanaka. I'm 49 years old, and I've been the head ranger at Acadia National Park in Maine for the last 12 years. Acadia is relatively small as national parks go, just over 49,000 acres on Mount Desert Island, and it's heavily visited, getting over 3 million tourists a year. It's beautiful, but manageable, scenic without being dangerous. The kind of park where the biggest problems are usually traffic congestion and people taking selfies too close to cliff edges. At least, that's what I thought until last June, when the fog came in wrong and I found myself walking through a version of Acadia that nobody else could see. I've been trying to get back to the real park ever since, and I'm starting to think I might never make it. It happened on June 17th, a day that started normally, I was doing an early morning patrol of the Park Loop Road before the tourists arrived, checking for hazards, enjoying the quiet. Around 6 a.m., fog started rolling in from the ocean. Normal for coastal Maine, nothing concerning. But this fog was thicker than usual, came in faster, and had a strange quality to it, not just white, but somehow prismatic, catching the early morning light in rainbow shimmer. I stopped my truck to watch it. It was genuinely beautiful, the way it flowed through the trees and over the granite cliffs like a living thing. Then it reached the road, and when it flowed over my truck, everything changed. The change wasn't dramatic, just subtle shifts. The road looked the same, but slightly different. The pavement newer, or maybe older, I couldn't tell. The trees were in slightly different positions. The sign I just passed was still there, but said Park Loop, 1,935 inches instead of the current year. I got out of my truck, confused, and the fog lifted as quickly as it had come. But I wasn't in the same Acadia anymore. The park looked similar. Same mountains, same ocean, same granite shores, but different in dozens of small ways. The buildings were in different architectural styles. The trails had different markers. And most tellingly, when I checked my phone, I had no signal. Not weak signal. No network detected, like the cellular infrastructure didn't exist. I drove back to the visitor center, figuring I'd have a better sense of what was happening once I got there. But the visitor center wasn't where it should be. In its place was a different building entirely, same basic location, but an older structure built in a style I didn't recognize. There were people there, tourists in clothing that looked vintage, but not quite. Like someone's interpretation of 1930s fashion, but slightly wrong. I went inside. The ranger at the desk looked up, smiled, started to greet me. Then her expression changed to confusion when she saw my uniform. "Excuse me, sir, but that's not standard issue," she said. "Are you with a different division?" "I'm Head Ranger Tanaka. I work here at Acadia." "We don't have anyone by that name on staff." She pulled out a ledger, an actual paper ledger, not a computer, and checked it. "And our head ranger is Frederick Morrison. Has been for 8 years." I tried to explain, tried to describe the fog, the shift, the change. She listened politely, then suggested I speak with Ranger Morrison. He arrived 20 minutes later, a man in his 50s, competent-looking, completely unfamiliar. "I think you're experiencing some kind of confusion," he said kindly but firmly. "Heat exhaustion maybe, or altitude sickness. Let me drive you to the medical station." But there was no medical station where I knew it should be. The roads were different. The whole geography of the park was similar, but wrong, like I was looking at Acadia through a lens that shifted everything by degrees. I've been here for 3 months now. 3 months trying to find my way back to the real Acadia, to the version where I'm head ranger, where my family exists, where everything makes sense. But every time the fog comes, and it comes often, that strange prismatic fog, I shift again. Sometimes to versions of Acadia that are almost right, sometimes to versions that are wildly different. I've seen an Acadia where the entire island is a native preserve, no development at all. I've seen an Acadia where Bar Harbor is a massive city spreading across the whole island. I've seen an Acadia where the mountains are taller or shorter or arranged differently. Each version has rangers who look at me strangely, who check their records and find no Richard Tanaka, who politely suggest I'm confused or lost. I'm writing this in what I think is my 7th or 8th different version of Acadia. I've stopped counting. In this version, the park is smaller, more rugged, less developed. The rangers here think I'm a hiker who got disoriented. They've been kind, but I can tell they think something is wrong with me. Maybe something is. Maybe I had a stroke that day in June and everything since has been hallucination. Maybe I'm in a coma in a Maine hospital and this is all fever dream. But it feels real. The park feels real. Just not my park. I've developed a theory. The fog doesn't move me through space. It moves me through possibility. Every time it flows through, I shift to a different version of Acadia, a different timeline where different choices were made, different outcomes occurred, and I haven't found the pattern yet, haven't figured out how to navigate intentionally. I just shift randomly, landing in whatever version of the park the fog decides to show me. I miss my family. I miss my real Acadia. I miss being Head Ranger Richard Tanaka instead of some confused man who shows up in ranger uniforms from timelines that don't exist here. If you're reading this, if you're a ranger at Acadia in any version of the park, watch for the prismatic fog. Don't let it catch you. Don't stand in it. Don't think it's beautiful, because once it takes you, I don't think you can get back. You just keep shifting through infinite variations of the same place forever, almost home, but never quite making it. The fog is coming again now. I can see it rolling in from the ocean, catching the light, shimmering with colors that shouldn't exist. Maybe this time it will take me somewhere closer to home. Maybe this time I'll find the right Acadia. Or maybe I'll just keep shifting forever, a ghost ranger moving through infinite parks, never quite belonging anywhere. My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm 31 years old, and I'm a backcountry ranger at Denali National Park in Alaska. Denali is massive, 6 million acres, most of it completely wilderness, with only one road penetrating 92 miles into the interior. It's grizzly country, wolf country, a place where nature operates on its own terms and humans are visitors at best. I've loved working here for the 5 years I've been stationed at Wonder Lake, loved the wildness and the scale and the sense of being truly remote. But last month, I found something near the Muldrow Glacier that has made me question whether we're really alone out here, whether there are other intelligences in the Alaska range that have been watching us far longer than we've been watching them, and whether some of the wildlife we've been documenting is actually something else entirely. It was early September, and I was doing a solo patrol along the McKinley River, checking on backcountry campsites and documenting fall caribou migration. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the 50s, that particular quality of Arctic light that makes everything look surreal. I was about 40 miles from the nearest road, completely alone, exactly where I wanted to be. I was photographing some fresh wolf tracks when I noticed something odd. The tracks were normal. Adult wolf, probably male based on size, but next to them were other tracks. Similar to wolf tracks, but larger, with 6 toes instead of 5, arranged in a pattern that didn't match any canid I knew. And the stride was wrong, too long for a wolf, too regular, almost like the animal was moving with mechanical precision. I followed both sets of tracks for maybe half a mile. The wolf tracks wandered normally, investigating scents, marking territory. The 6-toed tracks moved in a perfectly straight line, never deviating, never stopping, just maintaining the same pace and direction regardless of terrain. Then both sets of tracks stopped at a clearing, and in the middle of the clearing, I found something impossible. It was an animal, looked like a wolf, gray fur, about the right size and shape, but when I got closer, I could see it was wrong. The proportions were slightly off. The eyes were positioned a few degrees different from where wolf eyes should be. And when it turned to look at me, I realized it wasn't blinking, just staring with perfect focus, its eyes tracking me with an intelligence that seemed too sharp, too aware. I froze. Standard protocol when encountering potentially dangerous wildlife. Don't run, don't show fear, make yourself large, back away slowly. But this animal didn't act like wildlife. It didn't bristle or growl or show any sign of threat. It just watched me with those two intelligent eyes, and I had the distinct impression it was evaluating me. Then it did something no wolf has ever done. It sat, raised one paw, and traced something in the dirt. A symbol, deliberate, precise, clearly intentional, 3 lines forming a triangle with a circle at the center. I stared at the symbol, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. Animals don't draw symbols. Animals don't use abstract representation. This was behavior that required not just intelligence, but symbolic thinking, theory of mind, intentional communication. The not-quite wolf looked at me, looked at the symbol, looked back at me, waiting for a response. I pulled out my notebook, drew the same symbol on a page, held it up. The animal's ears pricked forward, not in the way a dog's ears move reflexively, but deliberately, like someone raising their eyebrows in acknowledgement. Then it stood, turned, and walked away. Not like a wolf loping off, just walking, almost human in its gait, disappearing into the willows. I examined the tracks it left. Same 6-toed prints, same mechanical precision, and around the clearing I found more symbols scratched into rocks, drawn in patches of dirt, etched into tree bark. All variations on the same theme, geometric patterns, triangles and circles and lines, arranged in ways that seemed to have meaning even though I couldn't decipher it. I took photographs of everything, collected samples, documented the encounter in detail. Then I hiked back to Wonder Lake Station and spent 3 days researching, trying to find any record of similar sightings. I found them, dozens of reports going back decades, filed by rangers and researchers and backcountry travelers. Animals that looked almost normal, but not quite. Bears with proportions slightly wrong. Caribou with too many joints in their legs. Ravens with feathers that moved independently. Always described as uncanny. Always associated with unusual intelligence. And often found near geometric symbols scratched or drawn in various media. The reports were scattered across different parks. Denali, Gates of the Arctic, Wrangell, St. Elias, all the remote Alaska parks. And they all had one thing in common. They were filed but never investigated, just noted and archived, as if the Park Service had a policy of acknowledging these encounters but not pursuing them. I contacted a wildlife biologist I knew who'd worked in Alaska for 30 years. At first he was dismissive, suggested I'd seen normal wildlife, and was pattern matching on unusual tracks. But when I sent him my photographs, his tone changed. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked. "About 40 miles up McKinley River near Muldrow." Long pause. "That's a thin place." "Oh, what?" The native Athabascans have concepts about certain locations, places where the boundary between what they call the real and the other real is permeable, places where things can move between states of being. They don't talk about it much with outsiders, but the elders know. Certain areas in Denali are recognized as thin places. And you believe this? I've been in Alaska long enough to know that indigenous knowledge often describes reality more accurately than our scientific models. Just because we don't have terminology for something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. He paused again. The things you saw, the not quite animals, they're what the Athabascans call the observers. Beings that watch the boundary, that exist partially in both states, that can appear as animals but aren't really animals. They've been here far longer than humans, and they have their own purposes. What purposes? Observation, documentation. They watch how humans interact with wilderness, how we move through the landscape, what impact we have. They're rangers, in a sense. Rangers from the other reel, making sure the boundary stays stable. Why would they show themselves to me? Maybe they're acknowledging you, ranger to ranger, or maybe they're warning you about something. The symbols you found, those are markers, boundary markers, places where the membrane is particularly thin, where crossing over is possible if you know how. I thanked him and ended the call, my head spinning. I should have dismissed it as superstition, as folklore misinterpreted as fact. But I'd seen that animal. I'd watched it draw a symbol. I'd documented behavior that couldn't be explained by any model of wolf intelligence. I went back to the clearing a week later. The symbols were still there, but there were new ones too. More complex, more detailed, forming patterns that looked almost like a map. And in the center of the clearing, clearly placed intentionally, was a wolf skull. Old, weathered, but positioned carefully, facing toward Denali, the mountain, not the park, with small stones arranged around it in that same geometric pattern. I understood then. This was a message, a communication from whatever intelligence existed on the other side of the boundary. The observers wanted me to know they were there, wanted me to know they were watching, wanted me to understand that the wilderness we think we're protecting is also protecting something we don't fully understand. I still work at Denali, still patrol the backcountry, still document wildlife, still do the job I've always done. But now I watch for the things that are almost right, but not quite. The animals that move with too much purpose, the tracks that show too much precision, the symbols that appear in places where no human has been. And sometimes late at night at Wonder Lake Station, I see them. Shapes moving through the darkness that look like wolves or bears or caribou, but with that slight wrongness that marks them as other, watching the station, watching me, making sure the boundary stays where it should, making sure humans stay in our reel while they stay in theirs. They're rangers, just like me, just from somewhere else, protecting something I can't quite see but know is there. And as long as I respect the boundary, as long as I don't try to cross over, I think we can coexist. Two sets of rangers in the same wilderness, each watching over our own version of what needs protection. The observers are still out there, still drawing their symbols, still maintaining the membrane between reels. And I'm still here, documenting what I can see, respecting what I can't, and understanding that some wildernesses extend in directions we haven't developed the senses to perceive. My name is James Kowalski. I'm 62 years old, and after 38 years with the National Park Service, I'm finally retiring next month. I've worked at 8 different parks, held positions from seasonal trail maintenance to regional coordinator, and I thought I'd seen every variation of weird that public lands could offer. But my last assignment, 3 years at Carlsbad Caverns National Park in New Mexico, showed me that some caves go deeper than geology can explain, and some darkness is inhabited by things that make the deepest ocean trenches look shallow. Carlsbad Caverns is famous for its immense cave chambers. The big room alone is 8.2 acres, but the mapped portions are just a fraction of what exists underground. There are miles of unmapped passages, chambers that have never been fully explored, and deep shafts that descend beyond where our equipment can reach. As Cave Resources Manager, part of my job was overseeing research into these unmapped areas, approving expedition permits, managing the delicate balance between exploration and conservation. In January of last year, a team of experienced cavers requested permission to survey a recently discovered passage in the lower levels, about 900 feet below the main tourist routes. The passage had been found by accident during a survey of cave hydrology, and preliminary exploration suggested it might connect to a major new chamber system. I approved the expedition. The team was qualified. Their equipment was excellent. Their safety protocols were thorough. 5 cavers went in, 3 explorers, 1 photographer, 1 geologist. They had 48 hours of provisions, multiple communication systems, emergency beacons. After 36 hours, we lost contact. No radio response, no beacon signals, nothing. We initiated rescue protocols, sent in a team to retrace their route, found their base camp exactly where it should be, but no sign of the cavers themselves. Their gear was there, their supplies untouched, but they had vanished somewhere in the unexplored passages beyond. We searched for 3 weeks, brought in specialized cave rescue teams from across the country, used ground-penetrating radar, sent robots into passages too tight for humans. We found nothing. 5 experienced cavers had simply disappeared into the earth. The search was called off in February. The families were notified, condolences offered, the passage officially closed and sealed. I filed my report, recommending stricter controls on deep-level exploration, suggesting certain areas of the caverns might be too dangerous for routine access. But I couldn't let it go. 5 people don't just vanish. Not with modern equipment and safety protocols. Something had happened, and I needed to understand what. I went back to the passage 3 months later, alone, violating every protocol in the book. I'm 62 years old and should know better, but 38 years in the Park Service had taught me that sometimes the official explanation is just the one that makes people comfortable, not the one that's actually true. I descended to the lower levels, found the sealed entrance to the unexplored passage, unsealed it. The passage was tight, requiring crawling in places, but navigable. I followed the route markers the missing team had left, going deeper and deeper into unmapped territory. After about 2 hours, the passage opened into a chamber, not a large chamber by Carlsbad standards, maybe 50 feet across, but unusual. The walls were wrong. Not the normal limestone formations you'd expect in a cave, but smooth, almost polished, with a faint iridescence that reflected my headlamp in strange ways. And there were marks on the walls, not natural formations, but carved symbols, hundreds of them, covering every surface, arranged in patterns that looked purposeful. Geometric shapes, spirals, lines that connected and branched and formed structures too complex to be random. I recognized some of the symbols. They matched petroglyphs I'd seen in other parks, ancient markings attributed to ancestral Puebloan cultures. But these were deep underground, in a chamber that had been sealed by geological processes for thousands of years. No one should have been able to carve them here. In the center of the chamber was a shaft, circular, maybe 10 feet in diameter, descending straight down into darkness. I threw a glow stick into it, watched it fall, waited for the light to hit bottom. It fell for maybe 15 seconds before the glow disappeared. Either the shaft went down at least 1,000 feet, or something in the darkness had swallowed the light. But I could hear something from the shaft, a sound like breathing or wind or water moving far below, rhythmic, regular, almost musical, and mixed with it, faintly, voices, multiple voices, speaking or singing in harmony, too distant to make out words, but clearly human or human-like. I should have left then, should have sealed the passage and never come back. But I called down into the shaft, called the names of the missing cavers, asked if anyone could hear me. The breathing stopped. The voices stopped. Everything stopped. Complete silence, so total that I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood moving through my veins, the tiny sounds of my clothing and gear. Then something answered, not with words but with sound, a tone pure and deep that seemed to come from the shaft itself rather than anything in it. And that tone changed my understanding of everything. I can't describe what the sound communicated because it didn't use language in any conventional sense, but I understood. The way you understand a sunset is beautiful without needing words to explain it. The shaft went down, far, far down, beyond the reach of caves, beyond geology, beyond the normal structure of the earth. And at the bottom, or in the middle or throughout, I couldn't tell which, there was something, not alive in the way we understand life, but present, aware, intentional. The missing cavers had gone down, not fallen, gone deliberately, drawn by voices or promises or curiosity. And they were still down there, changed into something else, something that could exist in that depth, something that sang in harmony with whatever lived in the spaces beneath the caves. I backed away from the shaft, backed out of the chamber, through the passage, back to the sealed entrance. I resealed it more thoroughly this time, with barriers that would take serious effort to breach. I never filed an official report about what I found. What would I say? That there's something beneath Carlsbad Caverns that changes people, that calls them down into depth that shouldn't exist? That the earth is deeper than our instruments can measure, that there are spaces below spaces, that some caves lead to places geology doesn't have terminology for? I'm retiring next month, leaving the Park Service, moving to Kansas, where there are no caves, no mountains, nothing that goes down. I've spent my career protecting natural spaces, but I've learned that some spaces don't need protection. They need isolation. Some depths are better left unexplored. If you ever work at Carlsbad Caverns, stay in the mapped areas. Don't request permits for the deep passages. Don't listen for voices in the dark. And if you find a shaft that goes down further than it should, don't call into it. Don't throw anything into it. And definitely don't try to find out what's at the bottom. Because once you hear the tone, once you understand what's being offered, the temptation to descend becomes overwhelming. And I don't think anyone who goes down that shaft ever comes back up, not in any form we'd recognize as human. The earth is deeper than we know, and some depths are inhabited. My name is Christina Park. I'm 24 years old, and I'm a seasonal ranger at Sequoia National Park in California. I took the job because I'm between grad school and real life, because I wanted to spend a summer in the mountains, because I thought it would be simple work with clear boundaries. But 2 months ago, I saw something in the giant forest that has made me understand that the oldest living things on Earth might not be trees at all, and that longevity changes everything about how consciousness works. Sequoia National Park is home to the largest trees on Earth, giant sequoias that can live 3,000 years, grow 300 feet tall, and exceed 30 feet in diameter. Working here means being dwarfed constantly, walking among living things so massive and ancient that human timescales become irrelevant. The General Sherman tree has been alive since before the Roman Empire. The oldest sequoias were already ancient when humans first developed writing. I love that sense of deep time, of being temporary in a forest that operates on millennium scales. At least, I loved it until I started noticing patterns in how the trees were arranged. It was subtle at first. I'd be doing trail maintenance or visitor service, and I'd notice that certain groups of trees form shapes when viewed from specific angles. Triangles, circles, spirals, geometric patterns that looked deliberate. I mentioned it to another ranger, an older guy named Tom, who'd been at Sequoia for 20 years. "Yeah, people notice that sometimes," he said. "It's just how trees grow in response to light and water. Our brains are wired to see patterns, so we find them even in random distributions." But I couldn't shake the feeling that the patterns weren't random. I started mapping them, noting which trees formed which shapes, trying to see if there was any consistent structure, and there was. The patterns were too regular, too precisely geometric to be coincidental, and they changed. Not day to day. These are trees that measure growth in decades, but over weeks, the pattern shifted. A triangle of trees would gradually become a square. A spiral would tighten or loosen. The changes were imperceptible in real time, but clear when I compared my maps from different dates. Trees don't do that. Trees grow toward light, away from competition, following simple biological imperatives. They don't coordinate movements to form changing geometric patterns visible only from the specific vantage points. Unless they're not just trees. I found the first message in early July. I was doing an evening patrol through the giant forest, enjoying the quiet after the tourists had left, when I noticed something carved into the bark of one of the massive sequoias. Not graffiti. The carving was too high up, at least 20 feet above ground level, and too precisely done. It was a symbol, 3 circles connected by lines, forming a triangle. I'd seen that exact pattern in my maps, 3 trees forming a triangle, with the distances between them matching the pattern carved into this bark. I examined the carving more closely. The cuts were fresh, made within the last few days based on the sap flow, but there was no evidence of how someone could have reached that height. No rope marks, no ladder scuffs, no disturbed bark below it. Over the next week, I found more carvings, always high up on the trees, always matching patterns I'd mapped, always fresh, but with no evidence of how they'd been created, and the symbols were getting more complex. No longer simple geometric shapes, but intricate patterns that looked almost like writing, like some language using position and relationship rather than letters. I photographed everything, documented each location, tried to find a pattern in the pattern, and I did. The carved trees formed a trail, each symbol pointing toward the next, leading deeper into the giant forest toward the oldest section where the truly ancient sequoias stood, trees that had been alive for 2,500 years or more. The trail ended at a circle of 7 trees known as the Cathedral Grove. They were among the oldest sequoias in the park, arranged in a near-perfect circle that rangers had always assumed was coincidental. But standing in the center of that circle, looking up at trees that had been alive since before Christianity, I understood it wasn't coincidence at all. The trees were arranged specifically to create this space, and in that space, something happened to perception. Sounds echoed wrong. Light filtered strangely through the canopy, and time felt different, not slower or faster, just different, like I was experiencing moments in a sequence that didn't align with normal causality. I heard something then, not words exactly, but communication, a low vibration that I felt through my feet, through the ground, through the entire Cathedral Grove. The trees were speaking, or something through the trees was speaking, or the concept of speaking wasn't quite right for what was happening. But I understood the message. We have been here. We have been watching. We have been learning how to communicate with the brief-lived ones. Please acknowledge that you understand. I stood there, frozen, my rational mind screaming that trees can't communicate, that I was experiencing some kind of sensory hallucination brought on by infrasound or electromagnetic interference, or something equally explainable. But I responded anyway. I pulled out my knife and carved into the soft bark at ground level, gentle enough not to harm the tree, deep enough to be visible. I understand. What are you? The vibration changed, became more complex, layered with harmonics that I felt in my bones. And images came with it, not visual images, but concepts, understanding downloaded directly into my awareness. The sequoias weren't just trees, or rather, they were trees, but they were also something else. The oldest ones, the ones that had lived through millennia, had developed something like consciousness. Not human consciousness, nothing remotely similar to human thought patterns, but awareness nonetheless. Slow awareness, operating on time scales measured in decades and centuries, perceiving reality in ways that incorporated spans of time I couldn't comprehend. And they had been trying to communicate with humans for generations. The geometric patterns, the changing arrangements, the symbols carved high in the trees, all attempts to reach across the gap between their time scale and ours, to make contact with creatures who lived and died in what was, to them, the blink of an eye. The vibration continued, and I understood more. The sequoias were part of a network. All of them, throughout the forest, connected through root systems and fungal networks and something else, some kind of bioelectric communication that operated on frequencies we hadn't discovered yet. And the oldest trees, the ones that had achieved this slow consciousness, were the nodes of the network, processing information gathered across centuries, maintaining memory of every season, every fire, every change in the forest. They wanted me to know, wanted someone to acknowledge them, to understand that the giant forest was more than just trees. It was a distributed intelligence, a collective consciousness operating on geological timescales, aware and intentional and patient, beyond human comprehension. The vibration faded. The strange quality of time in the Cathedral Grove normalized. I stood alone among 7 ancient trees, shaking, wondering if I had just experienced first contact with an alien intelligence or had a complex hallucination or both. I left the cathedral grove and hiked back to the visitor center, my mind racing. I should report this, should document it officially, should tell someone that the sequoias are conscious, that the forest is aware, that we've been working in the presence of intelligence without realizing it. But who would believe me? And what would happen if people did believe me? Would the park become a circus? Would researchers descend with instruments and experiments, treating the trees like subjects instead of whatever they actually were? I decided to document it privately. I continued my work, continued my mapping, continued finding the symbols and patterns, and I started responding. I carved acknowledgments into the bark where I found messages. I left offerings at the bases of the oldest trees, water during dry periods, clear deadfall, protection from careless tourists. And the forest responded. The patterns became more deliberate, more clearly communicative. I started to understand the language, position, relationship, timing, all conveying meaning when interpreted across weeks and months. The trees were teaching me how to perceive on their time scale, how to see changes that happen too slowly for normal human attention to catch. I learned things. I learned which areas of the forest were healthiest, where fires needed to happen for regeneration, where human impact was causing damage the trees couldn't compensate for. I learned about the deep history of the forest, about fires and droughts, and changes in climate that had occurred over millennia, all stored in the collective memory of the oldest trees. And I learned something profound. We've been looking for extraterrestrial intelligence, beaming messages into space, building radio telescopes to catch signals from distant stars. But we've been surrounded by non-human intelligence all along. It's just that it operates on time scales so different from ours that we failed to recognize it as intelligence at all. The sequoias have been here for millions of years. The oldest individual trees have been alive for 3,000 years. They've watched human civilization rise, watched us learn to use fire and tools and language. They've been trying to communicate with us the entire time. We just weren't listening. I'm still at Sequoia, still working as a seasonal ranger. My contract ends next month, and I don't know what I'll do then. Part of me wants to stay, to continue learning the tree language, to serve as a translator between human time and forest time. Part of me is terrified of what I've discovered, of the responsibility of knowing that the forest is aware, and we've been treating it as scenery. I'm writing this as a record and as an invitation. If you work at Sequoia or any park with old-growth forests, pay attention to the patterns. Watch how the trees are arranged. Look for symbols carved high in the bark. Listen for vibrations that aren't quite sound. The trees are speaking. They've been speaking for millennia. They're just speaking so slowly that we've been deaf to them, treating them as furniture in a landscape we think we understand. But they're alive. They're aware. They're conscious in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. And they've been waiting very, very patiently for us to learn how to listen. My name is Michael Torres. I'm 44 years old, and I'm a backcountry ranger at Glacier National Park in Montana. I've worked the high country for 16 years, comfortable with grizzlies and mountain weather and the kind of isolation where you might not see another person for weeks. I thought I knew these mountains, but last winter I learned that some valleys in Glacier don't exist on any map. And the people you meet there have been dead for over a century, but don't seem to realize it. It happened in February during a solo winter patrol. Most of Glacier closes in winter. The Going to the Sun Road is snowed under, most facilities are shuttered, and only a handful of rangers maintain minimal presence. I was on skis, checking backcountry cabins, making sure everything had survived the early winter storms. The weather turned fast, the way it does in the mountains. Clear morning became whiteout conditions by noon. I was about 12 miles from the nearest road, visibility down to maybe 20 feet, temperature dropping into the teens. I needed shelter fast, and I knew there was an old ranger cabin somewhere nearby, a historic structure from the early 1900s, no longer maintained but still standing last time anyone had checked. I found it more easily than I expected, the cabin appearing out of the whiteout almost like it had moved to meet me. But as I approached, I realized something was wrong. The cabin wasn't abandoned. Smoke was coming from the chimney, light glowed in the windows, and I could hear voices inside, multiple people talking and laughing. I knocked. The door opened, and a man in ranger uniform looked out at me. Except his uniform was wrong. Too old. The style from maybe the 1920s or 30s, and his face was weathered in a way that spoke of decades in harsh conditions. Come in, he said warmly, ushering me inside. Terrible weather for traveling. You must be frozen. The interior was warm and bright, heated by a pot-bellied stove lit by oil lamps. 4 other people were there, 3 more rangers in vintage uniforms, and a woman in period clothing. All of them looked solid, real, physical. All of them welcomed me like I was an expected guest. I'm Michael Torres, I said, confused but grateful for the shelter. Ranger out of West Glacier. Pleased to meet you, the first man said. I'm Ranger William McIntyre. This is Ranger James Holbrook, Ranger Samuel Green, and Ranger David Foster. And this is Miss Elizabeth Cartwright, who was kind enough to visit us from the valley. They spoke with careful formality, the kind of speech patterns you'd find in old books, not modern conversation, and they seemed genuinely pleased to have company, offering me coffee from a percolator, a seat near the stove, a blanket to warm up. I accepted, still confused but willing to go along until I figured out what was happening. Maybe they were reenactors. Park Service sometimes did historical demonstrations, though never in winter, never this deep in the backcountry. What are you all doing out here? I asked. Same as you, I expect, McIntyre said. Winter patrol, making sure the high country survives the season, checking on wildlife, documenting conditions. It's good work, even if it gets lonely sometimes. But this cabin isn't staffed anymore. It hasn't been used as a ranger station in probably 80 years. They exchanged glances, something uncertain passing between them. 80 years? McIntyre said slowly. That seems unlikely. We just restocked supplies last month. I pulled out my phone. No signal, but the date display was clear. It's February 2024, I said. The silence that followed was heavy and strange. The woman, Elizabeth Cartwright, set down her coffee cup with a hand that was suddenly shaking. That's not possible, she whispered. It's February 1924. I'm certain of it. I came up here 3 days ago to visit William. We're to be married in the spring. I looked around the cabin more carefully. Everything was period accurate. The oil lamps, the stove, the dishes, even the newspapers stacked near the door. I picked one up. Kalispell Daily Interlake, dated February 12th, 1924. The paper was yellowed, brittle, clearly genuine. "I think," I said carefully, "that we might all be experiencing something unusual." McIntyre nodded slowly. "We've noticed things have been strange lately. Days that seem to repeat. Weather that changes without transition. And sometimes, through the windows, we see Glacier as it shouldn't be. The valley with buildings that don't exist. The mountains with different names. The forest cut in ways we never approved." "You're seeing my time," I said. "Modern Glacier. And I'm seeing yours." "Then Elizabeth's voice trailed off. "We're not alive anymore, are we? In your time, we've been dead for a century." I checked my phone again, pulled up the park history files I kept offline. There it was. Ranger William McIntyre, killed in avalanche, February 15th, 1924, along with Rangers James Holbrook, Samuel Green, and David Foster. They'd been at a high country cabin when the avalanche hit, burying the structure completely. Their bodies weren't recovered until spring. And Elizabeth Cartwright. She'd been visiting her fiancé at the time. She died with them. "I'm sorry," I said. "But yes, all of you died. February 15th, 1924. 3 days from now, from your perspective. An avalanche." They took this information with remarkable calm, as if, on some level, they'd already known. McIntyre walked to the window, looked out at the storm. "We've been living these 3 days over and over, haven't we? Trapped in the loop between when we arrived at the cabin and when we died." "It seems that way." "Can we break the loop?" Holbrook asked. "Can we move on?" "I don't know. I'm not even sure how this is happening. Some kind of temporal overlap where your last days and my patrol are occurring simultaneously in the same space." Elizabeth was crying quietly, and I felt helpless. These people were ghosts, but they were aware, conscious, trapped in a loop of the last days of their lives, and in 3 days, less than 3 days from their perspective, they would die again, and the loop would reset. "Why can we see each other?" Green asked. "Why is the boundary thin here?" "Maybe the violence of your deaths," I suggested. "Or maybe something about this specific location. Or maybe winter in the high country creates conditions where time behaves strangely." We talked through the afternoon and into the evening. The storm continued outside, and I realized I wasn't going anywhere. I was trapped by weather in a cabin with 5 people who had been dead for a century. We shared stories. They told me about Glacier in the 1920s, about the early days of the park, about the work of being rangers when the service was brand new and everything was frontier. I told them about modern Glacier, about the millions of visitors, about climate change affecting the glaciers, about how the park they loved was still beautiful, but forever changed. "Will we be remembered?" Foster asked quietly. 100 years from now, does anyone know we existed?" "Yes," I assured him. "There's a memorial plaque. Your names are there with the date, February 15th, 1924. The Park Service honors its fallen." They seemed comforted by that. As night fell and the storm intensified, we settled into a strange peace. I slept in a chair by the stove, and when I woke at dawn, I was alone. The cabin was abandoned. No smoke in the stove, no oil lamps. The furniture was rotted and broken. The windows were shattered. Snow had drifted in through gaps in the walls. It was the derelict structure I'd expected to find, a century-old cabin falling into ruin. But on the table, written in fresh snow that had blown in, was a message. Thank you for the company. We understand now. W.M. The storm had passed. I skied back to civilization, filed my patrol report, didn't mention the encounter. What would I say? That I'd spent a night with ghosts? With rangers who'd been dead for a century, but didn't know it until I told them? But every winter since, when I'm on patrol in the high country, I look for that cabin. Sometimes I find it abandoned and ruined. Sometimes I find it with smoke rising from the chimney. And if I knock, William McIntyre answers the door, and we all spend an evening together, 5 rangers and 1 woman who are living the last days of their lives on repeat, and 1 living ranger who keeps them company for a night. They know now that they're dead. They know the loop resets. But they say it helps to have visitors, helps to be reminded that they lived and that their service meant something. So I visit when I can, when the weather and the timing align, when the boundary between 1924 and now grows thin enough to cross. Glacier National Park is full of ghosts, rangers who died in avalanches and falls and storms, visitors who never made it back from the high country, all of them still here in some way, still walking the trails, still living their last moments over and over. And sometimes in winter, when conditions are right, you can meet them, can share their fire, can remind them that they're remembered. The mountains keep their dead, and some of them haven't realized they're dead yet. But that doesn't make them any less real, any less deserving of acknowledgement and respect. I'll keep visiting that cabin as long as I work at Glacier. Keep sharing evenings with people who died before my grandparents were born. Keep reminding them that their names are on a memorial, that they mattered, that a century later, someone still knows they were here. It's the least one ranger can do for another. My name is Lisa Huang. I'm 37, and I'm finishing my final week as a park ranger at Joshua Tree National Park in California, before transferring to a desk job in Sacramento. I'm leaving because 3 months ago I discovered that some of the rock formations in the wonderland of rocks aren't rock at all, and some of the night sky above the Mojave isn't showing me stars from this universe. And I've spent too many nights watching something massive and incomprehensible move between the boulders in shapes that hurt to perceive. Joshua Tree is strange on the best days. It's where the Mojave and Colorado deserts meet, creating a landscape that looks alien. Twisted Joshua trees, massive boulder piles, vast empty basins. It's popular with rock climbers, hikers, and people who come to experience the profound silence and darkness. We get 3 million visitors a year, most of them respectful, most of them understanding that the desert is harsh and unforgiving and demands proper preparation. But some areas of the park are avoided even by longtime rangers. The Wonderland of Rocks is one of them, a 12-square-mile maze of granite formations, some as large as buildings, piled in seemingly random configurations. It's beautiful and disorienting and dangerous. People get lost there regularly, even with GPS. The rocks create magnetic anomalies that make compasses spin. Cell phones don't work. And there's a quality to the silence there that feels different from normal desert silence. Heavier, more present, more like something is listening. I was assigned to a night patrol in October, checking on backcountry campers, making sure no one was starting fires or damaging the fragile desert ecosystem. I was alone, standard for night patrols, and I was walking through the edge of the wonderland around midnight. when I noticed something wrong with the sky. The stars were moving, not the normal movement of celestial objects across the night sky, but deliberately, actively moving. Individual stars changing position, forming and reforming patterns, like someone was rearranging them in real time. I stopped walking, stared up, tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The constellations I knew were still there: Orion, the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, but they were interspersed with new patterns, new configurations, new stars that definitely weren't normally visible, and all of it was slowly rotating, slowly shifting, as if the sky itself was alive and changing its expression. I looked down, tried to reorient myself, and that's when I saw the rocks moving. Not shifting due to temperature changes or settling, moving deliberately, flowing like liquid or like they were made of something other than stone. The massive boulders were reconfiguring themselves, creating new passages, closing old ones, forming shapes that seemed purposeful, even though I couldn't understand the purpose. I backed away slowly, not running, but definitely leaving, when I heard something, a sound like stone grinding on stone, but deeper, more organic, almost like breathing or speech. And I realized the boulders weren't just moving, they were speaking, or something was speaking through them, using the friction of rock on rock to create sounds that might be language, if I knew how to interpret them. I ran then, ran back toward my truck, toward the paved roads, toward areas where humans were present and reality behaved normally. But as I ran, I kept looking over my shoulder, and I saw something that I still see in my nightmares. The boulders were forming a shape, a massive shape, maybe 200 feet tall, vaguely humanoid but not human, made of thousands of individual rocks moving in coordination. And it was turning toward me, its form still assembling, its impossible geometry hurting my eyes to look at directly. I made it to my truck, drove back to the visitor center, sat in the parking lot until dawn. I didn't report it, didn't tell anyone. Convinced myself I'd been hallucinating, heat exhaustion even though it was a cool October night, dehydration even though I'd been drinking water regularly. But I kept seeing things after that. During day patrols, I'd noticed that the wonderland of rocks was arranged differently than I remembered. Passages I'd walked through before would be gone, replaced by solid rock. New openings would appear where there had been none. The configuration was changing, slowly but definitely, and no one else seemed to notice. And at night, always at night, the stars would move. The sky would show me patterns I didn't recognize, constellations from different angles or different universes or different fundamental realities. I started researching, found that the Serrano and Cahuilla peoples who lived in this area for thousands of years before Europeans arrived had extensive mythology about the Wonderland. They said it was a threshold place where the skin of the world was thin. They said the rocks were alive, not in a biological sense, but in a way that predated biology, and that they moved and spoke and had purposes beyond human comprehension. They also said that looking too long at the true form of the rocks could drive people mad, that some shapes aren't meant to be perceived by human minds, and that on certain nights the sky above the Wonderland would show not our stars, but stars from other places, other configurations of reality where different laws of physics applied. I found reports from other rangers going back decades, documented sightings of impossible geology, of stars in wrong positions, of sounds like speech coming from the rocks. all filed and ignored, treated as heat exhaustion or equipment malfunction or overactive imagination. But they're real. The moving rocks are real. The changing sky is real. The wonderland of rocks is a threshold, exactly as the indigenous people said, and when conditions are right, when the boundary between our reality and whatever lies adjacent to it grows thin, you can see through, can see the rocks as they truly are, can see the sky as it truly is, can glimpse the larger structure of reality that we normally perceive only the surface of. I'm leaving Joshua Tree because I can't unknow what I've seen. Can't pretend the wonderland is just interesting geology. Can't look at the night sky without wondering if those are our stars or if I'm seeing through to some other configuration. I'm taking a desk job, indoor work, paperwork and administration and things that happen in buildings where reality is stable and rocks don't move and stars stay where they belong. But I know I'll never really leave, because once you've seen the threshold, once you've glimpsed what lies adjacent to our version of existence, you carry that knowledge forever. And on certain nights, no matter where I am, I'll look up at the sky and see stars that don't belong, and I'll know that somewhere in the Mojave, the wonderland of rocks, is still moving, still speaking, still maintaining its threshold function. The desert keeps its secrets, and some secrets are too large and too old for human minds to safely contain. But we contain them anyway, those of us who've seen too much, and we carry them like wounds that never quite heal. One more week at Joshua Tree, then I'm gone. But the wonderland will still be there, still moving, still waiting for the next person curious enough or unlucky enough to see it as it truly is. I hope whoever comes after me is wiser than I was. I hope they stay on the trails, keep their eyes on the ground, avoid the wonderland at night. I hope they never see what I've seen. But I doubt it. The threshold calls to certain people, draws them in, shows them what lies beyond the comfortable illusion of stable reality. And once you've seen, you can never unsee. No, the rocks are alive, the stars are wrong, and reality is far stranger and far more malleable than we're taught to believe. One more week, then I'm done. Then someone else can carry this knowledge. Someone else can patrol the threshold and pretend that everything is normal while reality shifts around them. I've done my time in the space between worlds. Now I just want to live somewhere solid and unchanging. Even though I know that no place is truly solid, that change is the only constant, that underneath every comfortable reality lies something vast and ancient and incomprehensible. But I can pretend. In Sacramento, in an office surrounded by paperwork, I can pretend that the world makes sense, that rocks are just rocks, that stars are just stars, that reality is stable and knowable and safe. It's a comfortable lie, and after 3 months of living in the truth, comfortable lies sound very, very good. These stories were all different. Different places, different experiences, different horrors, but they share common threads. Rangers working alone in remote locations, encountering things that shouldn't exist, trying to document the impossible while maintaining enough sanity to continue doing their jobs. The National Park Service will never officially acknowledge any of these incidents. They'll continue treating reports of anomalies as equipment malfunction, stress-induced hallucination, or simple mistakes. And maybe they're right to do so. Maybe the truth, that our national parks are thin places where reality behaves strangely, where consciousness exists in forms we don't recognize, where time and space and causality are less stable than we believe. Maybe that truth is too destabilizing for public consumption. But rangers know. We walk these thin places. We patrol the boundaries between the known and unknown. We encounter the strange and impossible and try to protect both the wilderness and the people visiting it, even when we don't fully understand what we're protecting them from or what it means for something to be wild in ways that transcend biology and geology. These 10 stories are just a sample. There are hundreds more filed in forgotten archives, written in private journals, shared between rangers late at night when the official day is done and truth becomes possible again. The wilderness is deeper than we know. The parks contain more than scenery, and some ranger work happens in dimensions our job descriptions don't acknowledge. But we keep doing it, keep patrolling, keep protecting, keep bearing witness to the impossible. Because that's what rangers do. We stand at the boundary between civilization and wilderness, between known and unknown, between comfortable reality and whatever lies beyond it. And we keep your park safe, even from things you'll never know were there.